Good evening. I'm pleased to open the International Conference on the Jewish Neighborhood and to welcome you all, participants and audience. I'm here in a somewhat unusual capacity. I'm not a student of Jewish history, and I've been asked to take part in this conference mainly on the merit, and it's a significant merit, of my long-standing friendship with Professor Simcha Goldin and his family. The conference is dedicated to the memory of Hadar Goldin, and I'm going to say a few words on Hadar, his father Simcha, and the Goldin family. This beautiful illustration on the invitation to the conference might mislead you to believe that Hadar's art focused on painting. But that's not the case. To paraphrase a well-worn concept, Hadar was a Renaissance boy. He had a curious and open mind and would not limit himself to one art, however good he was at it, or however much he loved it. Thus, he was also a pianist. I asked his piano teacher, who happens to be my wife, about her experience of teaching him when he was a very young boy, age 6 or 7. And she said that what impressed her most of all was a combination of his gentleness and sensitivity on the one hand, and his readiness to literally try his hand at anything, regardless of the difficulties and the inevitable mistakes. I was struck by this characterization because it corresponded very closely to how I thought about Hadar as a soldier and then officer in the IDF. Over the years of his military service, I heard from his parents, Leah and Simcha, about his experiences, the tests of will and intelligence he went through, the dilemmas he faced, and the choices he made, and about the cheerful and friendly spirit he showed, rain or shine. And there always was, I thought, was a sense of certain mysterious yet attractive incompatibility about it, of the delicate and sensitive hands that played the piano or held the paintbrush, and that now had to wield the gun, and of the boy who drew the lush and peaceful and civilized landscape of Cambridge, where he was with his parents 2 years, and now was training for war in the rugged terrains of Israel, or indeed fighting in the rubble and dust of Gaza. These are stark contrasts. Yet Hadar was able to accommodate them almost effortlessly, and to have a solid belief in the rightness and legitimacy of each of these very, very different conditions. Young men such as Hadar do not come out of thin air. Beyond their inborn aptitudes, they are the product of tradition, education, and family, and in this particular case, a very special family. The ultimate proof, if you want one, are Hadar's siblings. Like Hadar, each one of them has been encouraged to cultivate his talents and develop his capacities and his inner life and flourish as an individual. And like Hadar, they care a great deal about Israel, Israeli society, and the Jewish people, and consider it absolutely normal to sacrifice self-interest for the sake of the common good. If ever there was a proof that the contrast commonly drawn between individuality and self-fulfillment on the one hand and committed patriotism on the other hand, that this contrast is false, the Goldin family provide that proof. But again, to be able to impart these values, which at times may seem contradictory, to teach the children openness to the wider world and to other cultures, yet give them a sense of place, of home, and of cultural tradition, all this takes more than considerable effort. It takes considerable courage. And it reflects the Goldin's conviction that openness to diverse experiences and to the richness of the world is actually a source of strength and vitality. And this attitude, I would add, takes also a strong sense of self-knowledge and self-assurance. I've been observing this labor of Leah and Simcha with great admiration over the years. And I'm reminded of a well-known story that Plutarch tells in his biography of Aristides, the Athenian statesman and general. It is early 5th century BCE, and there is a voting underway for ostracism, that is for exiling someone from the country. An illiterate man comes up to Aristides, whom he didn't know and didn't recognize, and he asks Aristides to write for him on his potsherd, the ostrakon, the name, well, of Aristides. Aristides asks the man what harm Aristides had done to him, and he answers thus, I quote, "None whatever. I don't even know Aristides, but I'm fed up with hearing him called Aristides the Just everywhere," unquote. Aristides did not respond, wrote his own name as requested, and gave the man his potsherd. Now, I'm reminded of that story because if I hadn't known Simcha and had just heard the things I know from first hand, I would probably have felt like that illiterate Athenian. If I had not known Simcha and had just heard that Simcha was taking pains over reading the books his children were reading so that he could share their thoughts and passions, I would certainly have felt the same illiterate frustration. But I know Simcha, and I know that it's precisely these things that have given shape to Hadar's innate talents and that helped him become the remarkable young man he was. Reading the books of your children, the books your children are reading, is also an act of leadership. It is to give a personal example. Now, Simcha being a scholar by profession, reading children's books surely was done at the expense of reading academic books and articles. You might argue that that was not such a bad deal at all, but the element of sacrifice, I think, is incontestable. Now, I can give a lot more examples, but I will refrain from doing so, not because of time constraints, but because I fear that you might all conceive a powerful desire to exile Simcha. So, at any event, my point is that Hadar is an example of the vital role of self-assured education and of transmitting and instilling values in enriching our lives. A demanding education is not an imposition, not a restriction placed on human freedom, but actually the key to a good and meaningful life. And Hadar fully embodied this truth in his life, as both his military service and his pursuit of art and beauty showed. In both these activities, he wanted to transmit to others what he learned. He wanted to give others the gifts of the spirit he had received. Young though he was, he reached out to other people and sought to bring joy and wisdom into their lives. In dedicating this conference to his memory, we not simply commemorate him, we reflect on the good and meaningful life that he led, and we learn from it. we are moving over to greetings, and I would like to introduce Professor Raanan Rein, Vice President of Tel Aviv University. Raanan Rein is the Elias Suraski Professor of Latin American and Spanish History. He is also head of the S. Daniel Abraham Center for International and Regional Studies. Professor Rein is the author and editor of more than 30 books and well over 100 articles in academic journals and book chapters in several languages. He's a member of Argentina's National Academy of History and former president of the Latin American Jewish Studies Association. I think that will do. So Rein, please.
Shalom, good evening. I take great pleasure in welcoming you all to this international conference on the Jewish neighborhood. It's not easy to talk after Hillay and what he said about HADAR, but I'll start by referring to the topic of this conference. The late Jewish American comedian Alan King relates in his memoir that once he took his mother to see Fiddler on the Roof, in the hope that this fictional shtetl would kindle memories of her childhood in the Pale of Settlement, the western part of the Russian Empire to which most Jews were restricted until 1917. When the show was over and the two of them were walking on the street, King asked, Ma, how did you enjoy it? Did it bring back memories? And the answer was, it was wonderful, only I do not remember so much singing. Now this anecdote points to the huge gap between certain images that many have about Jewish life in Eastern Europe, based on fiction, like Sholem Aleicham's stories, and commercially successful plays on the one hand, and historical reality and historical research on the other. As the program of this conference shows, there is no one Jewish neighborhood. The Middle Ages tell one story, the early modern period tell another story, and the more contemporary times a different one. Medieval Spain is not medieval Cologne, and 20th century New York is not 20th century Sao Paulo. In October 2013, the Pew Research Center released the findings from their survey of American Jews. The survey provoked much attention from the organized Jewish community, as it pointed to an intermarriage rate that remains high at nearly 50%. Additionally, about half of all American Jews are unaffiliated with the institutional Jewish community, and more Jews are defining themselves as Jewish culturally and ethnically rather than religiously. These trends are not new. They have a long history that stretches back to the 1800s, as urban Jewish communities have attempted to accommodate Jewish life to modern political, social, and cultural developments. My own research on Jewish experiences in Argentina led me to focus my attention on the Jewish demographic patterns in the capital city of Buenos Aires, where some 85% of all Argentine Jews have settled. No neighborhood in Buenos Aires was exclusively Jewish. Once on Argentine soil, Jewish immigrants, like other immigrants from other ethnic groups, chose to settle close to those who had preceded them. But, as I said, it is important to state that while some areas may have received larger numbers of Jewish immigrants, like the neighborhoods of Once or Villa Crespo, these were never exclusively Jewish. The Jewish image had to do with the visible presence of everything Jewish in these neighborhoods. The Jews of Villa Crespo, for example, played an important role in the development of the Argentine tango, as well as Argentine cinema and Argentine football, without giving up on the Jewish ethnic identity component. Very many of them were unaffiliated with community institutions, but very many kept going to the synagogues, at least in the Jewish high holidays, and gave their children some Jewish education. The story of the synagogues and the schools is both an Argentine story and a Jewish one. Still others were just Jews, quote unquote, meaning that they were Jews by birth, by chance, and the influence of their Jewishness on their interests and choices was left uninterrogated. Now, as Hillay said, the program of this conference includes an illustration by Hadar Goldin, Zichrono Livracha, titled Variation on Chagall, and this opening session, this conference is devoted to his memory. With your permission, I would switch for a minute or two into Hebrew to say just a few words about Hadar and the Goldin family. הייתי בארגנטינה כאשר קיבלתי את שיחת הטלפון הראשונה מהאוניברסיטה ואת הדיווח על כך שיש קצין חטוף בפלס"ר גבעתי, וכנראה שזהו הדר, הבן של שמחה גולדין. במשרד שלי לא חיכו שאבקש לקבל עדכונים שוטפים על המצב, היה ברור לכולם שלמרות הפרשי השעות רצה לדעת בכל עת מה בדיוק עלה בגורלו של הדר. אוניברסיטת תל אביב היא קהילה לומדת ומלמדת, ומבחינה זו היא גם סוג של משפחה מאוחדת. מספר אנשי הסגל האקדמי והמנהלי שרצו לחלוק איתי את תחושותיהם לאחר שהתברר שהדר נפל בהיתקלות עם מחבלים ברפיח היה ממש מדהים. מרביתנו לא הכרנו, בניגוד להיליי, את הדר באופן אישי, אבל בימים ובשבועות שחלפו למדנו להכיר אותו, לפחות במידת מה, איזושהי הצצה, למדנו להכיר משהו מן האיכויות המיוחדות שאפיינו אותו ואת משפחתו, ולכמה דברים התייחס היליי לפניי. למי מאיתנו שמכירים היטב את שמחה, לא הייתה זו הפתעה גדולה, ולכן גם גודל הכאב שחשנו. אינני רוצה להאריך בדברים, לכן רק אומר שהמושב הזה, הכנס הזה, הוא רק מחווה אחת קטנה לזכרו. יהי זכרו ברוך. I would like to thank the organizers of this conference and welcome all the international speakers who have joined us in this scholarly event. I wish you all a productive discussion on different aspects of Jewish urban experiences. Thank you.
The next speaker is Professor Eyal Zisser, Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, Tel Aviv University. Professor Zisser is one of Israel's best-known academic experts on Syria and Lebanon, and the former director of the Moshe Dayan Center for Middle Eastern and African Studies. He's the author of numerous articles and books on Syria, and it's a very long year. I'll cut it short and just...
Well, my research has to do with the neighborhood, but not Jewish neighborhood, but our neighborhood all around. Shalom, good evening, dear friends, Simcha. To apologize me for moving to Hebrew because as Raanan, I would like to say a few words in Hebrew to Simcha and the family. לא מזג האוויר רגיל פקד אותנו היום, וחשבתי כשעשיתי את דרכי לכאן שגם השמיים בוכים. מבחינתי על תלמיד שלא היה לנו, למדתי קצת על הדר ועל מה שעשה ומה שרצה לעשות, ואין יודע אם היה בא ללמוד, אבל כאן באוניברסיטה שלנו, אבל אנחנו נמצאים בשבוע מיוחד, השבוע שקושר אותנו ומחבר בין חג החירות, העבר הרחוק, עבור ליום השואה, שאותו נציין בעוד מספר ימים, עבר הקרוב, קרוב מדי, וחלה בשבוע הבא ביום הזיכרון לחללי צה"ל, ומיד לאחריו יום העצמאות. העבר הרחוק, העבר היותר קרוב, ההווה שבו אנחנו חיים, וביום העצמאות אנחנו מרשים לעצמנו גם להסתכל בתקווה אל העתיד. כל מה שעשינו וחוללנו קרוב ל-70 שנות קיומה של מדינת ישראל, מתמצים, וכל מה שעבר גם באופן כללי יותר על העם שלנו, מתמצים בשבוע, שבועיים האלה שאותם אנחנו חווים. ואני הרביתי לחשוב על כך, דמות של הדר ומה הוא מייצג בשביל כה רבים מאיתנו. כשבאתי לבקר את שמחה ראיתי בהשתאות את המונים של בני נוער ומבוגרים שבאים מכל רחבי הארץ, לפעמים בלי היכרות אישית עם שמחה, כי נדמה לי שהדר לאותם אנשים, לכולנו בעצם, הפך לאיזשהו סמל, החיבור בין האינדיבידואל, היחיד, הבודד, לבין הכלל. כל הדברים האלה בעצם מתמצים בדמות של הדר, במה ששמחה חווה, וגם באירוע הזה ששמחה כאן ארגן. לא פשוט, אבל כולנו משפחה אחת, וכולנו ניסה יחד, אני בטוח, את זכרו של הדר גם בעתיד. תודה.
I'm delighted to introduce our keynote speaker, Professor Michael Brocke of the Salomon Ludwig Steinheim. Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
That will have to wait.
Good evening, everybody. Some people need the mic a little bit closer. Before we proceed to enjoy our first musical interlude, I would like to take this opportunity to recognize those who have collaborated in preparing this conference. First and foremost, our thanks go to the head of the Goren-Goldstein Diaspora Research Center, Professor Simcha Goldin, who is also the initiator and coordinator of the project Jewish Neighborhood, Exploring the Other Side of Medieval Urban Space, of which this conference is part. In addition to Professor Goldin, my friends and colleagues of the steering committee, Dr. Sarit Shalev Eini and Dr. Yosef Yitzhak Lifshitz, have been a great team to work with, sparing no effort to ensure the high academic level of the conference. The gross and fine details of the conference were skillfully managed by the office team, Ora Atzta and Yafit Miller-Rosenwasser, but the deepest applause go to our wonderfully efficient Sarah Appel, conference coordinator and administrative assistant, and to Anat Shimoni, who have been the heart and the mind of the conference all along. We would like to take this first interlude and invite our two musicians. Anat Rubinstein is a choral director and a pianist. She's a PhD candidate at the Hebrew University Musicology Department, specializing in choral, also oral, synagogue music. Yosef Yitzhak Lifshitz is an expert on Jewish philosophy and history and a researcher in the project The Jewish Neighborhood at the Goren-Goldstein Center. Tonight he will share with us his musical talent as a gifted violist. They will share two musical pieces with us. The first, a Kaddish for the High Holidays according to the Ashkenazi Rite by Maurice Ravel, taken from the Deux Mélodies Hébraïques. In 1914, Maurice Ravel composed two pieces for voice and piano, Deux Mélodies Hébraïques, for the opera singer Madame Alvina Alvi, a soprano with the St. Petersburg Opera. The first song, Kaddish, is an Aramaic Hebrew text from the Jewish prayer book, magnifying and glorifying God, and expressing a wish for a speedy coming of the Messianic era. The second song, which I'm not going to mention, because it's French, is based on a traditional Yiddish verse. They were first performed in Paris in 1914 by Alvina Alvi with Ravel at the piano. Ravel later orchestrated the songs in 1919 to 1920. As Cantor Bernard confessed, "For me, whenever I hear the end of the Ravel Kaddish, which uses a very clear motif from the High Holidays, an image always flashes in my mind of sitting next to my grandfather at High Holiday services. This is the power of music. It can evoke associations above and beyond our understanding of the theological or liturgical significance of a particular service or holiday." Thank you, Anat and Yitzchak, for this beautifully moving piece that you've chosen for us. The second is on an entirely different air. It's called Zemer Mapuchit, Harmonium Song. Alexander, better known as Sasha Argov, was a prominent Israeli composer. He was influenced by an assortment of musical styles: classical music, European lieder, Russian folk music, French chansons, ballroom music, Latin American music, jazz, pop, and rock, and wrote in an unusually intricate musical language which combined both popular and classical elements. Although occasionally very difficult to perform, his songs were so popular that they were considered an inseparable part of the collective consciousness and Israeli society. Thank you for this wonderful inspiration. I would just like to thank our 4 musicians, all of whom have volunteered to spend time with us. They have given us the pleasure, at least the first 2, the second 2 will be coming after Professor Brocke's lecture.
Have a second go. I'm delighted to introduce our keynote speaker, Professor Michael Brocke of the Salomon Ludwig Steinheim Institute at the University of Duisburg-Essen. Professor Brocke was one of the first German students in Israel, studying at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem since 1963. He later received his PhD from the University of Vienna in 1970. He taught at the universities of Regensburg, Duisburg, held professorships at Jerusalem, Los Angeles, Berlin, and Düsseldorf, visiting professorships at and since 1996, he has served as the director of the Salomon Ludwig Steinheim Institute for German Jewish History at the University of Duisburg-Essen. Apart from publications in German Jewish history and Jewish-Christian relations, Professor Brocke has made translation from the Hebrew and Yiddish, which include Nachman of Praslav, Sipurei Ma'asiyot. He has researched and published copiously on Jewish cemeteries in Ashkenaz, and the epigraphical online database Epidat, founded by him and his staff, contains at present 30,000 funeral inscriptions in about 150 cemeteries in Germany and the neighboring Netherlands from the middle of the 11th century to the 20th century. Professor Brocke, the floor is yours.
גבירותיי ורבותיי, מוריי וחבריי, תרשו לי מעט מילים בעברית. אני מאוד מודה לך, פרופסור שמחה גולדין, על ההזמנה למעמד המיוחד, המאוד מיוחד הזה. זה כבוד גדול, צד אחד, וזה גם אתגר לא קל. אני מקווה שאוכל לעמוד בו. Ladies and gentlemen, קהל נכבד, the dictionaries I consulted about neighborhood, they all agree on a twofold definition of neighborhood. Neighborhood, first and foremost, is your own neighborhood, your shchuna, הרובע שלכם, your quarter, quartier, das Viertel. It's being in your one's own, very own, amongst yours, your re'im v'chaverim u'shchenim. The second definition is, of course, and it's trivial to say that, it's the other one, the others next to you, near or far, separated by a street or a wall or a frontier, or not at all separated, but other. No need to elaborate before you about this. And it's interesting that the sample phrases the dictionaries give in various languages all tend towards the positive side. They accentuate the good side of neighborhood relations. And there's this word, this fine word, neighborliness, which means excellent, good relations. And the English language even knows a synonym for kindness, for kindly, being kindly, and that is the word neighborly. But the Hebrew language and its realism know also full well the other side, that shchenut is not a synonym of neighborliness. Meshech vekedar shchenenu, says a piyut. Bavel, Persia, Greece, Rome, all these were shchenenu. Uve Edom kimat shachna duma nafshenu. So shachen v're'ah, they're not automatically synonyms as they are in English. Thus, I will then use these two simple aspects of neighborhood, speaking about a famous Jewish neighborhood, which, seen topographically, is divided into two neighborhoods, which are one in between and all around, as everywhere else, the neighbors, the others, the Christian world, Edom. So let's begin with a short introduction to the former Jewish quarter in Worms and to the present cemetery. And this is the Etgar, the challenge, to show you that this cemetery is a place of life. It's not only a euphemism that the Hebrew knows the word Beit Chaim. It's not only a euphemism. I would like to show, perhaps even convince you, that this is a most vibrant neighborhood, both in space and in longue durée, in time, that it is even a very comforting and encouraging a praise of life and a call to life. So I wish to show how these simple, I know why, sure. Yeah, sorry. I wish to show you how these simple definitions are visible and tangible in this unique cemetery. I will first speak about the relations, the intimate relations between synagogue and cemetery. The cemetery and a few outside sources, then echoes of neighborliness, linguistic, onomastic, aesthetic cooperation and cooptation. The decline of neighborly relations, it is between Jews and Christians, oblivion and memory. So this is present-day Worms. How do we do that? There's no pointer. Now this is the medieval city wall, the former Jewish quarter, about 800 meters, and this is the cemetery immediately outside the wall in the center of the city with the cathedral. The old part, and then the late medieval, early modern, enlarged second city wall, which then quetched the Jewish cemetery in between the two walls. And after the destruction of Worms in the succession war of the Palatinate in 1689, these fortresses were no longer necessary, so the Jewish community could buy this part of the fortification, a wall, a steep wall down to the railway tracks. And this is the part of the cemetery from 1700 up to the 20th century. So this gives us a time space of 1,000 years. You see the excellent position of the Jewish cemetery in the Middle Ages, immediately adjacent to the center of the city with this enormous Romanesque cathedral. Now here, and I must remind you that this is the 17th and the 18th century, a reconstruction of this former medieval and early modern to modern Jewish quarter. You see the wall, you see the reconstruction of the houses, the names of which are known, and of course in the center, the synagogue from 1034, destroyed, rebuilt, destroyed, rebuilt, destroyed, rebuilt. The addition of 1213, the Weiberschule, the women's prayer hall, the so-called Rashi chapel of the 17th century, the mikveh down, and the Tanzhaus for the hall for the festivities, the vineyard, the bakery, the slaughterhouse, all what is needed for a Jewish community, and here place an open space. And this is the way it looks today. We built the synagogue, the Rashi Chapel, the women's synagogue. This is the city archives, the museum, Beit Rashi, and the precinct, as it were. You see here the Judengasse with its entrances, 2 entrances in the early modern time. Here, a rest of the city fortification. The Jewish houses built immediately into the wall. That means they had to finance these houses. There are even windows, which is rare for a fortification. So, concitoyens, citizens. Now, Google Earth, Google Maps, the cemetery today, the old part, the upper part, the newer part, the steep decline to the railway tracks. Here, the first city wall, and here, not even 200 meters, Edom, purely the cathedrals, Romanesque Cathedral St. Peter, just 2 stone throws. You don't see much, it's all greenery. It's a bipolar place. This is the place of the grave of Maharam Rottenburg, the famous ones. And this is the space where the Maharil, 100 years later in 1427, was buried. So a bipolarity, and a bipolarity between the cemetery and the Jewish quarter up north. The nearness of these 2 heterotopias is evident, and Martin Buber has written a moving piece about that in 1933 by comparing the stones and the stones of the cathedral. It is indeed 2 heterotopias, mutually makom acher, each one not necessarily hostile, but Trumim Shonim, nowadays a peaceful life of not really together, but not hostile anymore. Hope this will continue this way. But you see that this is a nearness which is not very often to be found. Now, this is a view of most of the cemetery in the 1950s, about 10 years after the end of the Holocaust and the Second World War. The lower part, about 1,300 headstones, and the upper part, a bit less, 1,250 headstones, 1,700 to 1,900 to the 30s even. There's a new cemetery outside Worms. The orientation of the headstones is visible. It's north, west, north. That means the inscriptions are facing northwards. And the eyes of the departed are looking to the southeast. In the 19th century, some of those buried up there were conscious of the place they were to be buried in. In some of the Hebrew inscriptions on the upper part, they express their consciousness of being buried be'admat kodesh, in this sacred soil, sacred space. And this shows the beginning of the historical interest in the headstones of former generation, being conscious of being buried among Gdolei Yisrael. There's no separate spacing for the different facets, the different aspects of neighborhood. There are no separate realms for Kohanim or for Yoldot, for Talmidei Chachamim, for the poor or the rich, for the noble, for the influential one. No. The distinctions to be found in this cemetery have to be read. They are visible in their wording and in their decoration, or more exactly, in the lack of decoration. Now, this, everybody has seen these photos, if not been there personally. This is the Maharam, this is a marker for the grave of the Maharam and his redeemer, Shlomo Alexander Miwimpfen, a Jew from Frankfurt who succeeded after many years by giving all his wealth to redeem the corpse of the Maharam, Rabbi Meir ben Baruch Mirottenburg, Maharam, the most important personality of Ashkenaz, Germany, of Ashkenaz in the 13th century, as posek, as decisor, as poet, as writer of responsa. So the Maharam went to make Aliyah with his companions in 1286, without, of course, informing his emperor, was taken prisoner in the Alps and spent the rest of his life in a fortress near Strasbourg, didn't want to be redeemed, didn't want to be bought out, and even after his death he didn't want to. So it took about 8, 9, or even more years until 1307 when his remains could be buried here. And this is neighborhood in the most intimate sense, because his redeemer, Shlomo Alexander Miwimpfen from Frankfurt, asked to be buried besides him. And so now this is a lieu de mémoire and a place of pilgrimage, not only of Jewish pilgrims, but of many others, youth and tourists, wherever they come from. And it's a place of prayer, of course, you see that, the Quidlich. And it's a place of storytelling, because there is a sipur to be told for the others that do not pray there. And this is the one pole. And the second pole is, of course, what I said already, is the tomb of the Maharil, which is isolated, so to say, at the other end, at the Rabbinerloch, Rabbinertal, or at Sanctos. Maybe he wanted to be buried near the mass graves, Kevarachim, of the dead of Tatnu of 1096. And according as legend has it, he didn't want anybody to be buried, Dalit Amot, around him, near him. So I think, perhaps I'm wrong, but it might be Minhag Magenza. It might be the orientation of the graves of the Mainz cemetery, because he spent only his last year in Worms. His wife died before him. She must be buried here too, but we don't know her tombstone. So maybe that these two poles signify two different approaches. I'd like now to delve into one family which we can follow for about 250 years, as most of the families we may follow genealogically up to the Black Death pogroms of 1347. And then all of it, there's a caesura, and it changes completely. Now, this is not one of the founding families, not one of the Asher Halevi, and not one of the Italian Calonimides, but is this a family, I think, is coming from Mainz, It's a family of Kohanim, Meir ben Yoel, Yoel ben Meir, Shmuel ben Meir, etc. Several ones which I think can be related. Now this is typical for the style of this family. The strata of language really distinguish between the different families, between these Kohanim and another, the Asher Levi Levite family. It's Zion Halaz al Kuch Haver Habachur Rabbi Yoel Bar Meir, and now this is interesting that not only he, the buried one, but also his father are named in the plural, and it's because of the plural of Kedoshim. In these ages, you don't speak of a Kadosh. It's always Kedoshim. Kadosh is only used for the father of, or the father of a buried woman or man. Only in the 14th century, we speak of a single Kadosh for himself. So it's Chasidei Kehuna, Mata Shel Kedoshim, plantation of martyrs, the pious of the priesthood. Gabay Tzanua, Ne'emanu Meyuman Lakol Ne'esaf El Amo, not Niftar, Ne'esaf El Amo. It's always for the more noble families, this one. And look at the benediction. Menuchat Re'ayat Irenu Ba'asher Ein Lo Ra'ata Uve'eden Gan. Now this is rather rare. There are very few others who are privileged with such a benediction. Menuchat Nishmato, Yechidato, Ra'ayato, of Irin v'Kadishin, of Irenu, of our messenger, of our angelic messenger. Be there what no eye has ever seen in Eden Gan, of course. So there's another member of this family, Meir Bar Yoel HaKohen, died in 1140, no, this is 1224. And this stone intrigued me for a certain time because, as you easily see, it is very different from those simpler ones, rectangular ones, surrounding him. Behind him, one of his daughters, Yiska, died before him. And to his left, a chazan, easily recognizable because of the musical notations. See them? Those little notes up here. Decoration for artists. But since there is a memorial inscription, partly saved, which once was in the synagogue, and you see the burning traces of it, and the right part just recently being returned from Sweden by a son of a Jerusalem rabbi. So now we can easily reconstruct it, and it has been published before, so I must say that. Bana habayit hazeh leshem Hashem Rabbi Meir bar Yoel mizera Kohanai betaf taf kuf ayin gimel liyitzira leminyan cheshbonai yizacher bezikaron tov lifnei Adonai ובבוא לבית השם יען יאמר אמן אדוני והבית הזה אשר בנה להתפלל בו לנשים הבוטחות אל השם ואל טובו לזיכרון טוב. So now it is clear why his stone looks the way, is shaped the way architecturally designed. It's quite simple. At the right, you see the late Romanesque portal of the women's synagogue, the Weiberschule, Frauensynagoge, a late Romanesque portal, and see the delicacy with which his gravestone is modeled. Look at this, and then the beginning of the Kehlungen, I don't was the English word? And see the same spaces here, and we can. So I think it's very impressive that his memory is embedded in the form of this stone. The wording of his inscription is very simple, deceptively simple. There's nothing specific about it. Kola over yomar tehi nafsho tzrora b'tzrorim. So this is a way of memorizing which is rare. And I think it's very finely illustrating the intimacy of the relationship between synagogue and cemetery. Now, he wasn't alone in sponsoring the women's synagogue in 1213. There was an inscription, a memorial plaque for his wife too, Judith. And I think we found her. Judith bat Yosef. Yosef, her father, Nadiv, he built the mikvah in 1185. And he then is a widow of Meir bar Yoel HaKohen, who died 16 years before her. The proof is in this lost inscription. She is a daughter of Yehosef Nadiv. And I think the decoration, the palm branch, speaks for this too. She died, and her inscription too doesn't mention her engagement, her building the women's synagogue together with her husband. The synagogue and music. It's interesting to find the gravestones, the markers for chazanim and meshorerot being decorated, being ornamented. This is a very modest, small stone for Malka bat Chalafta, a meshoreret, that means in modern Yiddish a Fürsorgerin, the woman who transmits the prayers of the man towards her fellow women. And I would love to know the meaning of the sign to be found after cleansing the stones from moss and lichen, which is here below the ayin of bracha, this one. Is this a bird's head? Is this an instrument? Is this her voice symbolized by a bird's head? I do not know. We'll find out later. And here's her brother, Chazan, Shaliach Tzibur, Kalonimus ben Chalafta, Neherag al Kiddush Hashem, 1220s. Now see his decorations. It's not very sharp, the photograph, I'm sorry. It's easy to explain the instrument on the left. This is a psalterion, Arabic qanun, a very popular instrument in the Middle Ages. It has strings and is played with a bow. But to the right is this too a bird's head seen from below or from above? Or isn't this bellows? Aren't these bellows for a bagpipe? Could be the bellows, lenaper, a bagpipe, a dudelsack. Anyhow, it seems to be that these families were very special families, very pious, very important for the musical culture of this community, for Worms is famous for its musical traditions. One of the very first stones after Tatnu, after 1096, is a simple stone for a traveling Meshorer, singer, by the name of Boleslav. And this is the only Slavonic name in Worms. He died just after Pesach in 1135. Boleslav HaMeshorer. No father's name, no the whereabouts, know where he did come from, where he went to. So, but he got a stone. And so we know from the 17th and 18th century that princely visitors, dukes and duchesses, wanted to hear the singing of the Jewish community of Worms in the synagogue. So this also seems to be an aspect of longue durée, the musical tradition of Worms, Minhag Worms. And now the most famous ones of those Meshorerot, women singers, she's very popular now in neo-Orthodox, as far as I know, Orthodox women's emancipation, but under the name of Urania, because Ludwig Levinson, a Reform preacher at the side of Koppel Bamberger, the Orthodox rabbi of Worms in 1855, misread her name. He did see that this is a Gimel, and he thought it was a Nun, so he read Urania, second line, up there. But it's a French, a Romance name, Orgia, comes from the half or. So Orgia is popular as Urania, but she is Orgia HaMeshoreret. But Avraham Rosh HaMeshorerim. She died in 1275, which is indicated in this, to be read twice, LeHashem, and also the date of her death, perhaps also of her age. So read it, if you can see it from there, it's no problem. Ha'even hazot hu k'ma lerosh בחורה, מרת אורגיה החשובה הבחורה החשובה הנבחרת, בת החבר רבי אברהם ראש המשוררים, first he, תפילתו לתפארת, בכל קולו בעד עמו בנעימת עטרת, והיא גם היא בכל זמרה ושירים משוררת, בפיוטים ובעתירה להשם תהיה במשמרת. This reminds one of the famous dirge for Dolce and Bellet, the daughters Faroker. So, this is another example of the love of aesthetics, of rhyming, and being honored together with her father, Rosh HaMeshorerim. So we see that women had a specific place in this community, and I think that this cemetery, as many others, but we have mostly spolia, spoils only, remains as Würzburg's, all in shatters, that such a rare cemetery does justice to the women insofar as half of the stones are for men, more or less, and the other half is for the women. And the inscriptions for the women are not less artistic or long or short as those for the men. So this is, I think, a most important source for the social, cultural, religious history of the Jewish woman of the Middle Ages and of the early modern times, and if not so, then at least the way they were seen by their husbands, by their children. Now, We are leaving the neighborhood, the intimacy of synagogue and cemetery. We are outward bound. We leave the neighborhood and we are on the road between Magenza and Warmaiza, and there are other cases like this one between Warmaiza and Spira Speyer. Now this seems to be a very venerated stone because, oh no, I can't. It's Rabbi Yitzchak HaNeherag ben Rabbi Shmuel HaNeherag. And this is the only stone where these two lines are written above the stone, on its head, to be read from above. This, I forgot to translate this into English, I'm sorry. Even matzav ed lagal hamutlal על קבר נעים החלל, אשר ביד זדים נתעולל, יצחק בר שמואל המוכלל, בצניעות, באימון וביושר נתהלל, בתת קל, בלא כלח אל קבר אומלל, בקרביו באלול אל שחק נשלל, בעדן גן תנוח נשמתו. Now this reminds one of a short piyut, again transforming from one literary genre to the other, a short piyut in a yotzer for the second day of Pesach, Afik Renan v'shirim, by Meshulam ben Kalonimos of Lucca and of Magenza, 120 years before this stone of 1170. I wouldn't say that this is the immediate source, but it's the echo room of this intertextuality. This short piyut is beginning with 2 words or 3 words from Shir HaShirim, and then the Kahal answers by verses that all end on mutlal, nitalal, muchlal, etc. So correlation is not causation. So, as I said, this is an echo room because it's rather rare that you are rhyming so perfectly and so consequently on lamed lamed. You see, one might think that this rhyming is caused by the year, Taf Taf Kuf Lamed, and by Chodesh Elul. But the author, they are all anonymous, these authors. The author made it into a Bakashat HaLamedim, one could say so. So, and I think I would like to see a confirmation in a little booklet, a very important sources for the Second Crusade, 1147, and the years afterwards, Sefer HaZechira, written by Ephraim bar Yaakov Mibon, born in 1132, who jotted down these memoirs. Also, a Jew from Worms, a valiant, strong man by the name of Shmuel bar Yitzchak. See the other way around. It's not Yitzchak bar Shmuel, it's Shmuel bar Yitzchak. Stood up against him, the oppressors, Tzorarim, in that time, but in what time? On his way between Mainz and Worms. And they beaten him to death. They beat him to death. But he also wounded 3 of them. And his Kahal, his community, sent for him, for his corpse, and they brought him into his city, Le'iro, and he was buried there. So, I'm not sure whether Ephraim bar Yaakov Mibon switched the names, or perhaps he intends his father. Perhaps he means that this was his father, and he speaks about the years 1140 and not about 1170. Now, this is an intricate question which can't be dealt here, but this is a source that somehow confirms this stone, which seems to have been preserved, especially by this inscription above it, Haneherag ben Haneherag. Ephraim doesn't speak of Shtiva Erev, he doesn't speak of Yichud Hashem. It might have been just a robbery. We don't know. But we know more about the family. And this is the interesting in the cemetery, that we can link personalities together. And he has two sisters. This martyr has two sisters, and I would like to think he had twin sisters. How do we know that these are twin sisters? But let's first see what the stone for Pirutza, a rather rare name but not unique, says about in Tishri Taftaf Kufhei died Marat Pirutza, but Rabbi Shmuel Haneherag al Yichud Hashem. So now this is the father, Shmuel Haneherag al Kiddush Hashem. And her name is explained by telling us that הייתה זריזה במצוות, פירוזה, שהייתה זריזה במצוות, פירקה נאה, פירוצה, פירקה נאה. She seems to have died young because her sister is called Segira. And so I would venture that these were twins, like Peretz v'Zerach, Pirutza, Segira. Another one of those very special families, and Segira also, but Rabbi Shmuel Haneherag al Kiddush Hashem died many years later in 1172, and in between Yitzchak Haneherag. Why do I put stress on the names? And here now I am coming from one woman to the other woman onomastically. This is a very noble woman, difficult to read, but we are helped by three-dimensional laser scanning of a few stones. I hope this is more visible. Anyway, it's a woman of a famous lineage of the Levites, of this Asher HaLevi family, because Fromwood died in 1343. Skena, Fromwood Sarah, Shifra. I think that's sure that she was a Meyaledet also. Most of these elderly women worked as paramedics, as Meyaldot, midwives, etc. She is the daughter of a famous Dayan Av Beit Din in Cologne, Yakar ben Rabbeinu Shmuel HaLevi. She's the widow of a student and friend of Maharam Rothenburg, Rabbi Yeshayahu Mivail, and he, her husband, is the son of also well-known personalities, Elazar Darshan Würzburg. Now, what is interesting, that they took to great pains to make a complicated chronogram of the year 1343. Instead of expressing this quite simply, they put out a Aramaic word, which is not Aramaic, but which is German. There's no echo of any German word on the whole cemetery of the Middle-Aged and early modern part. There's no German word whatsoever, except in the 19th century. So what is this dating? Rami Rein pointed out to me that this must be an Aramaic word because there is one word in Traktat Chulin, mazmutin. Mazmutin, Aramaic or Greek, into Aramaic. These are the festivities that are held for bride and bridegroom in the week of their marriage. Before bride and bridegroom, all kinds of gaukelei, of candlelight, mazmutin. But this is not fitting for a burial. So I think under the cover of this pseudo-Aramaic, we have the German word, the antonym for Frommut, because Frommut has nothing to do with Fromkeit. It's Frommut, good spirits, joyfully. It's a nice name, which is still understood today. Middle High German. And the antonym, the contrary, is moroseness, sullen, moroseness. It's nearly the same as a modern definition. Missmut means moroseness, bad feelings. And we are assured that this reading is right by, she died at the end of the high holidays, Kafaf Tishri. So the year began in a very bad mood. It's a year of Mizmut Shemutav. May it become better. And it's interesting to note that with all the lament and all the tristesse and the being on a cemetery, we are witnessing here and there plays on words. I take another example, short example of the 16th century. Here, Röslen, Eshet, Avraham Blin died, flowers in the sides, Futuna, the Nikbera, Oi, Rasli, or Resli, or Rösli. It's taken from the prophets, from Isaiah, from Yeshayahu. Rasili, Rasili. Ich bin am Ende, I'm finished, Venien. So the name of Röslen, also in the acrostichon, several times, Shoshanat, Avraham. So the name, the German name of Röslen, Rose, little Rose, is converted into a lament. Vemie, oili, oili, rasili, rasili, or rasili, rasli. Enough. And while so many people are invited to the Yeshiva Shel Mala, to the study of House of On High, and that women like to be compared to Avigail, Eshet Chayil, to Dvorah, Tznuah B'Diborah, etc. We also find a freedom of expression. It's not only keva, it's also kavanah. It's fixed and it's free. Here we have a meyaledet by the name of Chava. Her husband says, Chashuvati, be in the bundle of life, be in Eden Gan, in Adam v'Chava. Now, not everybody would like to wish the benediction and paradise to be in the company of Adam v'Chava, but I think this is typical, even if it's very peculiar, and I never found anything different. So, and there is the kind of cooperation, Jewish clientele buying stones from the builder's hut, from the Bauhütte of the cathedral. We have a good number, nearly 26 examples of this Gothic window design. Instead of stained glass, we have words, letters, Hebrew letters filling in the spaces that might be used for designs. And as far as I have been told, there's nothing similar in the Christian world of similar design of gravestones. Simple ones, more elaborate ones, preferably for brother and sister, coming in pairs, different spaces. And this continues from the late 14th into the early 16th century. Very personal inscription, very intimate. But we also find the decline of the relationship between Jews and Christians. Here is an inscription which is full of bitterness, of contempt, of resistance, of deception, and of questioning, nearly questioning the theodicy. It's from 1261, the time of the interregnum. No emperor to protect his salvi camerae. So it's very difficult, but I think we can read it this way. Achi achi rechev Yisrael ufarashav, איך נפל בידיים ידי עשיו, עם בניו לראות עם פלגשיו, רצחו גם ירשו בשם, blots this out, this is בשם שווא. שמואל בר דוד נוגסיו, רצחו וירשו נוגסיו. פרט כ"א לאלף השישי ב-20 בתמוז דמו שפכו לגושיו. quote from איוב, ספר איוב, הן לא יאמין בקדושיו, האל, יצרור נפשו בשאר קדושיו. אמן, אמן, סלע. Intertextuality. It's also reminding one of a piyut by the Mainz Paytan Shimon Bar Yitzchak, famous Paytan, echo rooms. Now this is the detail of this stone describing probably a judicial murder. A judicial murder, probably by clergy. Esav, Pilagshav, a sharp critique of ecclesiastical authorities, and so I think, and full of bitterness, contempt, as I said, and now difficult to explain, but here we have this detail. B'Shem Shav. Now here in between there is a sign which I cannot explain. Nobody could explain it until now. In any case, it's utterly non-Hebrew. It looks like a Russian J, but it might be a humanoid android form. In any case, it's a caricature. It means, of course, the crucified Edom Christianity. And look, what is even more important and interesting is how distorted the following letters for Shav in vain. Also, ein Nicht, ein Elil, ja? B'Shem Shav, B'Shem Shav, compare the Shin and these Shin, see the crooked Aleph in order by word and sign expressing the other, the fiend, the foe, the hostility. In 1286, Maharam Rothenburg went for Aliyah in order to reach Jerusalem, which he never read. In the 80s, in the 1280s, there is a messianic upsurge, which I cannot find anywhere else in these documents. In these years, there is about a dozen tombstones which have this chronogram of Gimel Aleph Lamed, Lig'ol, to redeem, to liberate, redemption, Geulah. So here we have two. The owners of these stones are non-noble, are just normal members of the community, but their years are given either in Yig Allah here, Yig Allah, or in Hagoel, or Goel there. And there are many other possibilities for other years to be expressed by complex chronograms, but only in the 80s we find this, and then after these dozen tombstones who try to somehow express the hope for redemption, then again it lingers and it stops and there is silence for the rest of the time. Now there are losses. Of course there are losses. For example, this stone, the father of Meir Ben Baruch Mirotenburg, the father of the Maharam, Rabbi Baruch, the very elaborate stone typical for the end of the 13th century, which is lost. There was in the last month of the war, Allied forces bombed Worms several times, and as the rail tracks are adjacent to the cemetery, the rail tracks, of course, were bombs, but there were some hits also on the cemetery, and this stone, as well as the stone of Just Bar Shamash, the famous chronicler, Siporei Maaseh Nisim, are lost forever, but still they had been published. There were photographs of more than 100 years ago, like this one. We can read it, we can decipher it. Very interesting, very nice, all rhyming as all this did. So, and there are losses of another kind. Many of these stones of the 13th century looks this way, this one looks. We try to remember and to redeem and to read them, at least to revive them virtually, to make them again virtually to be remembered. Now let me draw a few conclusions. I hope you could see that this place strives for Hidur Mitzvah. We saw the intensity of communication between the synagogue and the community, the life of the synagogue in the synagogue, and on the cemetery, the inner community distinctions expressed by the styles, the strata of the language. And there may have been, most probably, so it seems, a special care for the preservation of the memorials of certain families of high ranking, and a tenacity to care for the markers of individual martyrs, because there is no collective memory, Ella for Yud Bet Parnasin. So this is a neighborhood of space and time of 1,000 years. And I think it's a very subjective impression of mine. I might be waxing pathetically when I'm saying it seems as if this, to quote Franz Rosenzweig, seems like a silent chorus of the redeemed ones, a reconforting chorus of showing the good life lived, the good life to be lived by us and by those coming after us. And when we read these voices, we seem to hear an echo. תודה על הסבלנות שלכם.
Thank you very much, Professor Brocke, for a remarkable and thought-provoking talk. I think we have another musical interlude, so I will present it.
To conclude this very special evening, we have two special musicians, duo Maya and Mattan. Maya Cohen, alto, accompanied by Mattan Inbar on the piano. Maya Cohen is a gifted singer and vocal trainer living in Jerusalem. Mattan Inbar is living in Tel Aviv. He began playing the piano at the age of 6 and is still in love with it and still playing it with a great passion. The duo Maya and Mattan has been active over a decade, performing all over the country, presenting a classical repertory alongside Israeli folk songs. The first song Maya will sing and Mattan will accompany, Be'eretz Ahavati Hashaket Poreach, In My Beloved Land the Almond Tree Blossoms. The song for the beloved land describes the land of Israel using biblical images of landscape and people. It was written by Leah Goldberg, a prolific poet, author, playwright, literary translator, and comparative literary researcher at the Hebrew University. Her literary heritage is well known to all, young and old alike. Many of her poems were composed and have become foundation stones of the Israeli musical scene. The music was written by Moni Amarillo, an Israeli composer with over 450 songs to his credit. Amarillo began his career writing symphonic and chamber music, but then went on to compose popular music. Beginning with a love song for the land of Israel, we now continue to a love song to God. Shirat HaAsavim, the song of the weeds or the song of the grass. The song is based on the teachings of Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav. Rabbi Nachman had a great affinity to nature, where he would go out to be alone with God. Nomi Shemer, considered by many to be the first lady of Israeli song, is known to us chiefly as the lyricist and composer of the unofficial second national anthem of Israel, Yerushalayim Shel Zahav. In composing the Song of Weeds, Nomi Shemer was inspired especially by Rab Nachman's words as follows. Know that every shepherd has a unique melody according to the grasses and the places where he herds. For every grass there is a song which it speaks, and from the song of the grasses is made the melody of the shepherd. Carrying over this idea, says Shemer, quote, and from the song of the grasses, the heart is filled and yearns. And when the heart is filled by the song and yearns for the land of Israel, a great light is drawn forth and goes from the land's holiness unto it. And from the song of the grasses, the tune of the heart is made. Our last song is also a love song for Jerusalem. Shalom Yerushalayim, Shalom serene city, I am returning to you from a 3,000 years journey. The song is a co-production by two prominent songwriters of the Hebrew popular soundscape. It describes the ages-long yearning for the holy city and the return to it from both a personal and a national perspective. It was written by Dudu Barak, a writer of Israeli folk songs who was born in Jerusalem. In an interview, Brocke stated that he is deeply rooted in the city, loves it to no end, and could not have been inspired to write about her the way he did had he lived elsewhere. Nurit Hirsch, an Israeli composer, arranger, and conductor, has written over 1,000 Israeli songs. She did her IDF military service with the entertainment troupe of the Armored Corps and began composing upon completion of her service. This song is another blessing to all of us.
Thank you very much, Maya and Mattan, and thank you all. We have to bring this very rich and varied evening to an end. Thank you all, and we'll see you all tomorrow in Gilman Building, right? Okay, have a good night. Bye-bye.